Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 12 of MOOC 10. Congratulations, you have made it to the end. You are here on the absolute final day and final session of MOOC 10. You are the elite of the course. You have gotten all the way to the end, and if you get a little bit further, you will fully complete the course. So congratulations, and nice to see you all again. Before we jump into today's session, I'm going to do a couple of logistical matters and pull them up in front of me so I say them correctly. The examination is coming up. It is 50 multiple choice questions. You have 2 hours to complete the examination after you access the exam. So you can pick your start time, but then you have 2 hours to complete it. The window is from November 30th at 2 p.m. Cyprus time to December 3rd, 8 p.m. Cyprus time. So mark your calendars. Don't forget to take the exam. If you pass, you will get your certificate of completion for the program, and it will be uploaded to the Bitcoin blockchain by about mid-December. So this is a way to put yourself in the history books. Not only you complete the course and demonstrate that you have competency in the material, and I've seen this on many people's LinkedIn profiles that they have said, I've completed the University of Nicosia MOOC on digital currency and cryptocurrency. And so it does mean something, a little bit something, small amount in the world of cryptocurrency and blockchain. And more interestingly, or equally interestingly, you will have a permanently attested certificate in the Bitcoin blockchain that you can validate whenever you want for wherever you want until the end of time or when the Bitcoin network ends, whichever comes sooner. There is the single most interesting case on the MOOC certificate is a student called Tay, who was Syrian and had to flee Syria due to the war and was in the Netherlands, and his visa ran out, and so they had him in a refugee camp, but they had internet there at the refugee camp in the Netherlands, and he completed the course, and he got his certificate. And with the certificate, he was actually able to renew his visa to stay in the Netherlands. And we learned about his story, and we thought that was amazingly inspirational, and we gave him a full scholarship, and he completed the full master's. And now he has started a startup on blockchain identity for people who are invisible. So people who, for some reason, they're refugees on one end, or people whose birth certificates are lost, or what have you. And it has, completely transformed his life. Now, I think that's a very extreme example, but it's an example we're very proud of and we think is super interesting. We also are the top 40 marks on the examination will have a 25% scholarship on the Masters in Digital Currency. And so note, it's the top 40. It's not a specific grade, so you're competing against everyone else, but certain people do get the scholarship every year. And this means, it's a 2,000 euros. So we have that there as an incentive, further incentive for people to study and try and do a good job on the examination. So I will note that for you. Needless to say, I would be remiss in not mentioning that we are currently admitting students for the spring semester intake of the program. And the spring semester intake, Andrea, do we have a deadline at which we have to admit by? Sorry, I sometimes don't remember the dates. Well, no, we clearly have a deadline. I think it's towards the end of January, beginning of February. So you have a little bit of time, but not a ton of time, as otherwise you will miss the window you'll miss the window to start in the spring. And it looks like what is shaping up to be another great cohort, both with a business orientation and a technical orientation. And heard some interesting things at the conference last week. Like, I've heard of a well-known company in this space who was out in the market looking specifically for graduates of our program. And so this is interesting. The program has gotten definitely a name in the industry. So if you are interested in this topic, please call us, email us, get in touch with Andreas, get in touch with Irini, and I think they'd be happy to talk to you about if this is the right fit for you. So with the logistical matters taken care of, let's jump into this last week of questions. Given limited educational and engineering systems, is it unrealistic to expect less developed countries to leapfrog a stage of technological development? Is leapfrogging just another word for hope and optimism in technological progress, improving our lives, since our relationship with technological development is ambiguous? No, I disagree with this. I think leapfrogging is real. It is not automatic. It does not work in all situations. It does not work for all topics, and we'll talk about certain topics where it makes more sense and certain topics where it makes less sense. But I think it is incorrect to say that leapfrogging as a concept just doesn't exist. The most classic example, and it's a cliche example, but it's a great example, and that's why it's a cliche, has to do with telephony. Right? So many less developed countries do not have fully built out landline networks. The landline networks started getting built out in the United States 80 years ago, right? Like in other medium income countries, maybe 30, 40 years ago. And it's quite expensive to build these out. Like, you have to run copper to every single person's house and business. And if you are a country that didn't have the resources to do that, and you maybe had a dispersed population, well, you never did it. And now it's 2018, and if there's some village somewhere that doesn't have telephony, are you going to go dig up the earth or put poles to run wires into every single person's house? No, of course not. Why would you possibly do that? And you won't do that for two reasons. One, it's vastly more efficient to put a cell phone tower which will cover the whole village. And secondly, it's not like there is a tremendous demand for landlines in anyone's house, right? Like, I mean, I think many people in developed countries below a certain age, where the copper wire already exists in their house, do not activate a landline, right? Like, I think I would be surprised if in, let's say, the United States, more than 20% of people under the age of 30 have activated a landline. And so if you went through the stages of development today, the way people had gone through them over the last 50 years, you would simultaneously spend a lot more money in order to get an inferior product, which is a landline that is hardwired to your wall, and you can't take it with you, and it doesn't have a whole set of applications and features that your cell phone has. So this is classic leapfrogging. What has happened is the technology has improved sufficiently in the sector that you don't need to take the intermediate step. You can just go right to the available step. And, you know, the more classic example in payments is M-Pesa, right? And it's the exact same concept, except not for landlines wired to the wall, but for banking. So you're in a village somewhere. that village doesn't have a bank branch. Is it plausible and sensible that what you're going to do in 2018 is go build a whole building? And, why do bank branches tend to be reasonably nice, right? Why do bank branches tend to have marble in their lobby? Well, it's to give people a sense of comfort and security that the bank is a good credit risk. If you have enough marble to the lobby, well, it's a safe place to give my money. Right? It's silly, it's psychological, but I think it's actually true. So you don't have a bank branch in Village X. Does it make sense to pour a whole bunch of concrete and marble or take people's phones that everyone already has, and the incremental cost of adding banking, the incremental cost of adding banking to that village, if it is through M-Pesa versus through a bank branch, is literally like the cost of a building or zero, nothing. It costs absolutely nothing, right? You've built the M-Pesa system once, and whether it's in one village, one town, one city, one neighborhood, or the whole country, it is exactly the same thing. You've done it once and suddenly you make it available to everyone. Well, you cannot replicate that with branches, right? That would be a whole countrywide project of hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. And at the end of the day, you're just going to end up with a branch network where some general manager is going to be like, oh, we got to switch to mobile banking, right? When people have existing branch networks, they're trying to close them. I don't know if anyone noticed, but they recently resolved the Cooperative Bank of Cyprus because it had high NPLs, and the Cooperative Bank was an agglomeration of village co-ops, a bunch of individual co-ops that got pulled together into one institution. And it had, I think at its peak, 800 branches in Cyprus, which is wild because Cyprus is not a big place, right? Cyprus in square miles is smaller than LA County, right? And then it had gotten down to 400 branches, and then the branch network was sold to Hellenic Bank, and they were going from 400 branches to 200 branches. And then, of course, people are getting all upset because, I used to have a branch in my village, and now I don't. What does this mean? Maybe my village isn't important anymore. But the reality is, when you have branches in 2018, you are generally trying to get rid of them. Bank of Cyprus charges you a service fee if you come and do a transaction in the branch, and not a service fee if you do it in your mobile application. Why are they doing that? To eventually reduce demand for the branches enough so they can start closing them. Right? That's obviously why they're doing it. So there are perfectly rational situations where leapfrogging makes sense. So if you see everyone with a branch network is trying to minimize it, shrink it, close it, and you don't have one, well, you've just solved a major problem in life. The problem of what to do with your branch network. You can just, Andreas says I have connection problems. Hold on one second. Can you hear me now? Okay, well, I didn't do anything, so I'm hoping I didn't do anything to correct my connection problem. So hopefully it was just a blip in the matrix and we will be back to normal operations. What I was saying is, I don't know where I got cut off, but what I was saying is, since branch networks, well, an asset in certain cases, are a liability in other cases, and many people are trying to shrink them and consolidate them and get rid of them, if you do not have a branch network today, you've saved yourself a huge problem of developing a branch network, which costs a lot of money, and then trying to get rid of it, which costs a lot more money. So you could just go right to where everyone with a branch network is trying to get to, which is mobile money. And it sounds totally obvious when I say it out loud, but it is an example of this concept. And what we're trying to teach in this course and on the program is the generic concept. It's a pattern. There is a pattern called leapfrogging. Does this pattern exist in all situations? No, of course not, right? There are some factors that need to happen for it to exist. What are those factors? Well, there has to have been a shift in the technology. There has to be at least one of these two things, and in most cases that have been successful, both of them, that the new technology is both more functional and much less expensive to build out. And when you have these two factors together, the setup for the conditions for leapfrogging exist. And I'm going to use that to lead into our next question. In a world with finite energy reserves and sources, why couldn't China leapfrog the Western Industrial Revolution stage of development by, for example, not having to move through the coal-burning energy source stages and leapfrog to alternative energy sources like solar, wind, hydro, and others? Great question. And given what we just said, I think the answer is staring us in the face. Renewable energy, while important and developing rapidly, during the last 10 or 20 years when China was ramping up, was not at a point that it was obviously cheaper and more functional than traditional energy sources. It is actually less functional than traditional energy sources because you have much more variability in production, right? Both solar and wind have variable production. And so if you have nuclear, if you have coal, you can be running on a continuous basis. If you have solar, you run during the day, you don't run during the night. If you have wind, it comes and goes. So it's arguably less functional. And until quite recently, it was more expensive. And so those aren't conditions where you would leapfrog. Having said that, China has made quite large investments in renewables. Like I think they have double the installed base of the United States, but they're also still rolling out a bunch of coal plants, right? So I mean, it's interesting that they are driving down the cost of solar panels globally, and yet they are also increasing their carbon emissions. It's a great irony that you would never guess listening to the rhetoric, but the single biggest drop in emissions last year was the United States, which is wild, right? Because if you listen to Donald Trump, you'd think that the United States is on a mission to send their emissions through the roof. No, they're dropping. And why are they dropping? Because of shale gas, and shale is incrementally cleaner. Shale gas is incrementally cleaner, and so it's replacing coal, and so the emissions are dropping. China emissions in absolute terms are rising. And it's because the energy needs in aggregate are so large. The energy needs in aggregate are so large that they have to roll out traditional technologies, and they're investing heavily in new technologies. Now, could this change in energy? Yes. I think it might soon. So when will it change? And I think it's going to change first with solar. So the latest solar projects that have been priced at unbelievably low prices. I think there was one in Abu Dhabi at like 2.5 cents a kilowatt, which is unbelievably low price. There are some parts of the world that now, well, let's put it in mind. There are parts of the world that on a full life cycle basis, solar is less expensive than traditional fossil fuels. There are some parts of the world where, a smaller set, where solar is cheaper than the ongoing costs of existing fossil fuel plants, which is really crazy, right? Like one's built and one's not built, and the cost of building and running one is less than the cost of just continuing to run another. So we're close to the tipping point on solar where it's not going to make sense to make conventional fuels in many scenarios. And with this asterisk, right now, solar can leverage there being existing baseload capacity to cover nighttime, right? And so if you just need incremental power during the day when electricity needs are higher, then solar can just slot in perfectly, and all you need to look at is the cost of generation. For solar to get to the point where it can fully replace fossil fuels, it has to be less expensive across the cycle, including storage, including batteries, and those are also dropping in price, and so you might see a crossover point there as well. But you know, China, that developed over the last 20, 30 years, during what it built out a lot of renewables, but during that period, renewables were more expensive than conventional fuels. We're starting to see the crossover now. And so you might see leapfrogging in 10 years or in 15 years in countries who are developing their energy resources then. So I don't think we're far off from the point, and I don't mean a year or two, but maybe 5 or 10 years, where people stop building coal plants. I think that might happen. We'll definitely see it in our lifetimes, that's for sure. That coal plants will be like bank branches, something you will never build again. And that's it has to do with the relative maturity of the relative technologies. All right. What is the most likely area where cryptocurrencies could have a vital disruptive role in less developed countries? Remittances, microfinance, or attestation? It's a tough question. All right, let me try and answer it in reverse order. The one where there is no technical challenge to them playing a role and no market barrier structure for them playing a role is attestation, right? Like if you say, I am going to validate XYZ on the blockchain, I'm going to attest it on the blockchain, I'm going to do a proof of existence of this contract on the blockchain, that's going to work equally well in Uganda and Malaysia and Saskatchewan and Germany and Argentina on day one. If you have internet access, you can get this done. So there are no technical structural barriers for this to happen. What are the barriers for this to happen in practice? Attestation usually has something to do with something that is going to touch upon the governmental or legal system. Right? It's attestation. So either the government's going to say, we accept this cryptocurrency blockchain-based solution, and it is a valid contract or a valid form of attestation. And so there is a legal change that needs to happen. Or we are going to put some governmental service on a blockchain-based solution. Right? It's our land registry, but on the blockchain. Well, what's the problem? Is there a technical challenge? No. In fact, is there a leapfrogging challenge? No, it's actually good for leapfrogging, which is from the perspective of if you have a very well-developed land registry, you might feel less anxiety to do a blockchain-based one. If it's not fully developed, if you're worried about corruption, if you're worried about security of title, you might be more willing to take the leap right into a more technology-enabled, more public blockchain type of solution, or blockchain, public or private, and skip trying to fix your existing system, right? Leapfrog. So from a technical perspective, I actually think attestation is the easiest. The question is, what is the likelihood that these countries have the legislative sophistication to go do it? And there, I think you have the opposite factor at play, right? Because I don't think you can do attestation in any meaningful way without the government coming and giving it its blessing. Saying, so one of two things, right? Either passing a framework that says, go do private initiatives in this regard, and we will recognize them legally, or saying, we're going to take this government service and move it to the blockchain. So realistically, the government's going to have to get involved. And realistically, there are not great examples of governments and it happens here or there, right? But it's not great example of the least developed countries, governments jumping on new technologies super aggressively. You have who jumps on new technologies aggressively? Technologically advanced countries. And then you have some interesting examples of like what were medium income countries, Estonia, South Korea, that then press the gas on technology and use that to become high income countries. So that also happens. There are less great examples of this happening. Some country taking itself, leapfrogging, blasting right through the middle income trap all the way to being a high income country, being super aggressive on technology, right? The reason everyone uses the M-Pesa example over and over and over again is because it's an unusual example, right? M-Pesa was one of the examples we're using for this 5 years ago, and it's still the main example we're using for this. So let's talk about the other two. Microfinance, I think, is the least plausible one. I am a skeptic of lending in cryptocurrencies as they are now. Why? Because they're too volatile, right? So imagine you lend me a Bitcoin, and it was $5,000, and I use that to go start a rabbit farm. And I knew I had to pay you back a Bitcoin plus whatever, 10%, 5%, 20%. And along the way, my rabbit farm is doing okay. And Bitcoin goes to $10,000 when I have to pay you back. There's no way my economic model is going to support that, right? The other side is also just as bad, right? Like you're very excited. Oh, the Bitcoin goes to 2,000. So me, the borrower, is very excited. You, the lender, are very unexcited by this scenario. All right. So, and this is bad conceptually, but it's even worse when you think like how much daily volatility there is in this area, right? It's not like this happens once over a 5-year period. You could be having these swings like 20 times a year. And so, I don't know, like this sounds like kind of a nightmare even for a sophisticated financial system. It's not the right answer. It's not the right answer for, I think, what people think of microfinance, which is serving the types of smaller, less sophisticated customers that banks don't serve well today, right? Like it's kind of negligent to go lend to them in a cryptocurrency. Now, remittances, I believe remittances are interesting. They are And there is some work that's happening in remittances, or if you broaden it, transnational payments. So remittances, what people mean is someone is sending money back. You're a worker from the Philippines or Sri Lanka or Mexico, and you're working somewhere else, and you're making money on an ongoing basis, and you're sending money back many times a year because you need to send money back to your family. And it's not like you're saving it up once a year and sending $5,000 once a year. You might be sending $200 this week, and then $150 next week, and then $30 the next week, and then $200 the next week. So you have a lot of small payments. And the problem there is that those small payments tend to be not efficiently served with the traditional system. And you end up with the transaction fees being a quite high percentage of the remittance. Could be 5%, could be 10%. On the smaller transactions, could be 20%, 30%. And that's a real shame, because spending that type of money to just move your own money around and having that type of loss rate on your money is rather horrifying. And it's even worse when you have this happen to people who tend to be on the lower end of the income spectrum. So they're already working hard and battling to make ends meet, and they're sending money back to their family, and they are paying a percentage-based penalty that nobody who has a more high-income job like I do have to pay, right? Like, the money comes from the University of Nicosia, it comes into my bank account, I lose zero in that process, and then I go spend it on a variety of different things, and I also lose zero in that process. And it's a shame. Now, what are the challenges to remittances? Well, let's talk about what is much less of a challenge in remittances, which is volatility. Because remittances can happen very quickly in cryptocurrency. And yes, the price is volatile. And yes, you might get caught out in a particularly volatile 1 hour period. But on the whole, over these relatively small periods, the volatility is manageable, and you can even do tricks. Let's talk about tricks. How do you do remittances in cryptocurrency and manage volatility if you're the remittance provider? Well, you keep accounts in exchanges in both countries, the one you're sending and the one you're buying. You want to do a remittance. At the moment that you're doing a remittance, you buy and sell in the relevant markets that you want to buy and sell, and then send the actual token over to balance yourself out. And so you can actually manage your volatility pretty well that way. And there are models in, so there's a firm called Align Commerce, where their model is transnational business payments. And they don't talk at all about how they do it. And they use different methods depending on what's cheaper. But one of the methods that they use is you're sending money from the United States to Europe. They ACH it out of your bank account, and they send it across the Atlantic with Bitcoin, and then they send it within Europe using SEPA. And it turns out, under many different scenarios, not all, but many different scenarios, it's actually less expensive than doing it with the existing financial system. And that's interesting, because you wouldn't think that the US Euro corridor is actually the expensive one, and it isn't. But in one of those life unfairnesses, it isn't the most expensive in the traditional system, but it's also the most developed in the crypto ecosystem. And so between the banking being reasonable on both sides, and the exchanges being existing on both sides, and the exchanges being liquid on both sides, you can actually have the easiest time of all exchanging across US dollars and euros to US dollars, and it works. It's interesting, it works. And when I say remittances, actually, I see a comment in the comments that says, if you don't use the crypto quickly, you're vulnerable to high volatility. The way these things work, like, it immediately switches over to your sovereign currency, your national currency. Like, Aligned Commerce never tells you that there's Bitcoins involved or that you end up with Bitcoins at the end. They say you would like to send 50,000 euros to Europe, and at the end, the person on the other side gets 50,000 euros. The people who take the volatility risk is the service provider. The end consumer, the end customer doesn't touch that at all, and that's how it has to be. Exactly zero people want to take on this type of volatility in their life, in their day-to-day payments, in their day-to-day transactions. If you want to separately hold some crypto for investment purposes, that's fine. But if you need to send $300 back home to pay your kids' elementary school tuition, you don't want the exciting surprise. You don't want the exciting surprise of, hey, you might get 300, or you might get 350, or you might get 250. Even though it could go up, nobody's really looking for the combination of remittance plus a lottery ticket, right? That's kind of what volatility is in the space. Like, it's whatever you're trying to do plus some random function lottery ticket. And that's not a product, I think, that's generally appealing to consumers. Like, who wants that? And this would, the next generation of this, people will look at stable coins. People will look at national cryptocurrencies. They're coming. It's only a matter of time when you'll be able to trade, Canadian dollars and Singaporean dollars and, I don't know, US dollars. We'll have to see it. I think that'll take longer on the blockchain, on some type of public blockchain. So there is and so for sure in developed markets, this works okay. There's work being done in less developed markets. There's BitPesa working in Africa. There's a bunch of firms in the Philippines. There is a bit of a last mile problem to the degree that people need to go to a physical location if they want to be exchanged out. The answer for this to take off in remittances, in any case, you need smartphones and internet connectivity, because without that, none of the stuff's happening. But you need smartphones, internet connectivity, and a easy-to-use and functional exchange in your country. Because then someone can wrap the whole service, knowing that they can clear out in the exchange, take a small commission every time from doing it, and deliver to you the money wherever you might be. And again, depends. If you need pesos and you're unbanked, you still need a physical place to change you out. And that's not going to be any cheaper, I think, than doing it the other way. But I believe remittances are interesting. I think there are opportunities in remittances. There are things happening in remittances. There are things happening in transnational payments. But we are not yet at the point where you can say it has revolutionized remittances, as some people thought might be the case. Okay, how can blockchain benefit Africa? Arguably, the same way blockchain can benefit any other country in the world. Right? Like, this is, I'm going to go back to what I said before on the different buckets. I think relatively there are more opportunities to for governments to leapfrog the provisioning of governmental services on blockchains than governments are taking advantage of. It's a shame. They're moving slowly, they're moving conservatively, and that's not just in Africa, that's everywhere in the world. And it would have been nice to see a little bit more experimentation going on, because I think there's real potential for better services and better efficiency and solving the types of problems that today are being solved with box files directly with some of the most exciting technology in the world. And we're getting to the point that we will have global equality of smartphones. I believe the latest study, and someone can double check me on this, is that we are close to a world of 5 billion smartphones. Or let's see. Let's check. Benedict Evans had a 5 billion cell phones, and of which half are smartphones. And I'm pretty sure most of the rest will be, from here on out, we're going to be smartphone based from here on out. And that's interesting, because that was not the case even when we started this program, right? Like when we started this program, we would have this discussion, we would say, yeah, I mean, that would be great, but you really need smartphones. And I think that's changing. So we're getting to a point where most of the planet is on a mobile phone, right? There's 7 billion people on the planet and 5 billion phones. If you take out children and the very elderly, that's effectively everyone has a phone. Now, it's not exactly everyone, but like it's close. And half of them are smartphones, which is probably going to be almost all of them within a few years, which means even in the less developed countries, you can launch services where we're close to being able to launch services that can presume that there is a smartphone available, that the population has a smartphone. And once that happens, certain areas should leapfrog, like certain governmental services should leapfrog. We're going to try and put our effort where our mouth is on this topic sometime in 2019 and actually try and do some trials on this. I have nothing to announce yet, but later next year, we're going to hopefully have some trials where we can say, this is how we think XYZ governmental services should work, and actually try it and do it. So, like everything else, I push us to get out of our ivory tower, though there is exactly 0 ivory here at the University of Nicosia, and actually test our solutions in real life, test our theories in real life, and see if they work. And so I hope by the next time we're teaching this section, I will be able to say, I think this will work for a governmental service, and here's an example where we're working in partnership with a government and trying to do it. Because one of my remarks at Decentralized is I think governments are not moving ambitiously enough on the parts that shouldn't scare them, right? There's a lot of still anxiety and fear about cryptocurrency. Whether that's right or wrong, it's understandable. There should be much less anxiety about doing custom clearance forms on a public or semi-public blockchain, right? That you're not risking anyone's money, you're not risking the stability of your financial system. It is taking something that today is being done in a relatively inefficient way and making it more efficient and more transparent and more programmable, and all the things we know blockchains are better for than traditional databases or, God forbid, box files. And governments and charities, but let's say with governments, blockchains arguably are perfect for this, right? Because arguably, transparency is very good for governments, and blockchains can deliver an awful lot of transparency. Like, if we go through an example, imagining you're running a municipality, and you're collecting local taxes and fees and what have you, and today how it works is you have a budget, and you set the budget, and the year goes through the year, and you spend your budget on a bunch of things, and there's a whole approval process on spending those things, and at the end of the year it closes, and maybe a few months later there's completed financial statements and maybe an audit and blah 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 blah. So it's in this like batch once a year process, and even then, is it super transparent? Like if I asked someone here in the municipality, we are in Cyprus, and we're a developed country, and what's the budget for the municipality, and what did they spend money on this year? I think nobody would know. And where do you get a copy of the budget? I think nobody would know. And what is like the number one spending line item of the municipality? I think nobody would know. I mean, effectively 0%. And yet this is like a civic enterprise, an enterprise that everyone's getting together and paying taxes for this to happen. Arguably, a governmental body could do all of its transactions in a manner that's recorded on a completely public real-time blockchain. Because what's the argument? Like, it's a governmental service. It's supposed to be transparent. In many countries, you have Freedom of Information Acts that can get this information. The government doesn't face competitive pressures. So it's not worried that if it leaks information, someone's going to steal their market share of, paving the roads or whatever it is they're doing, right? They kind of have these responsibilities by law. And so it's a super interesting fit for governments. Now, you have to be confident that you're doing things right. You have to be confident that you can go from a model where you're checked once a year in certain environments to any single person can check you at any time doing whatever. Well, yeah, okay, that's a important lens to have on you, not an easy one, right? Probably not working well enough for that to be the case, but it could be done. And it seems to me much more plausible than with private organizations, right? Because private organizations, whether this is accurate or not, whether it makes a difference or not, are super anxious about their financial data being private. They have a theory that this anxiety is misplaced, and I'll give you 2 reasons why. And I will also tell you that I'm hypocritical in this. But first theory is, back when I was a young management consultant, we did a lot of competitive benchmarking. And so big companies would hire us to learn other things about other big companies. And you would put these studies together with all types of super juicy, interesting information about their competitors, and they get very excited. And you'd see the management team and say, wow, that's really great that we now know their org structure of their sales force in the Eastern United States. And it's great. It looks like you've gotten this huge, big win as the person who's bought this study. What was interesting, though, was never exactly clear. In fact, it was almost the opposite. That then they changed anything the next day because they knew this information about their competitor. It was like, oh, we know this great information. And it's really hard to actually change what you're doing. And so there was a mismatch between how useful it felt the information would be I know all these things about my competitor, with how useful it is to know all these things about your competitor. And honestly, in relatively stable industries, eventually all the competitors know everything about each other. It doesn't make it very easy. It still doesn't make it any easier to go change what you do and how to do it to gain some advantage over the other person. So that's one data point. Second data point, I think just like you have a culture today with young people that are much more comfortable sharing personal information, there are some younger companies that are much more comfortable sharing their own private financial information that in a manner that is shocking to an old person like me. So I just gave Andreas a link, who will share it with you, of a company called Buffer. And Buffer is a startup, I think in San Francisco, if I'm not mistaken. And they share an amazing amount of information. I am currently on their website, and you can see the exact salary to the dollar of every employee. Alfred from marketing, who is a content marketer based in Singapore, makes $86,753. That's wild, right? Like that makes me, so what am I going to say? I'm a hypocrite. I would, and Buffer's been doing this for a while, and even though you would think to yourself, this is like horrible and terrible. Like if you told some company, the truth was like, oh my God, our salaries are on the web. It's like, we've been hacked, right? Like everything's gone wrong. And so Buffer's been doing this for a while. And there's another page that's their public dashboard that shows how much revenue they have every month, how much revenue they have per user, how much they're getting for fees. And then there's a nice dashboard that's like as nice as, or nicer than any dashboard that I have internally at the university. And this is for a different company altogether. And so I can kind of go in and maybe kind of see more up-to-date information about a company that I'm not an employee of than I can get from our own databases. And so here, I'll show you their revenue dashboard, which is also crazy. And so you look at this, and this is the bleeding edge of private corporate transparency. I had never seen anything like this before. And so if you look at their control center, right, there's a monthly recurring revenue and net revenue, and they can see how many new trials they had today, how many new subscriptions, how many reactivations, who canceled their account, who paid. It doesn't say who their exact customers are, but like it shows there's a real life dashboard coming out of their product management system. So this, to me, violates all my understanding of how a company should manage its financial information. And I've been watching them for a while and waiting to see kind of what tragic thing is going to happen by doing this. And as far as I can tell, nothing tragic has happened with this. Absolutely nothing. They seem to be going fine and being a perfectly nicely run small startup in the startup space. And actually more than small. They're up to 18 million in run rate. So no, actually mid-sized startup, no. And why I say I'm a hypocrite, like I've been watching Buffer for years. And if you told me, great, why don't you put all the salaries of everyone at the University of Nicosia on your website? I get very, very uncomfortable even at the thought. Leave aside that I'm just not going to do it. I just mentally don't have the capacity to do it. Even the thought gives me anxiety. And I can't exactly tell you why, to be honest. Like, I suspect Buffer might be more right than we are. Because, okay, we went and saw Buffer's salaries. And they're kind of what you'd expect they would be for a tech company in expensive locations like New York and Singapore and Seattle and Cambridge and what have you, right? That's kind of the type of salaries you'd normally see in these locations. And it's the same reaction that I remember from my management consulting days. Like, okay, sure, I know Adam makes $93,090. And so what? Right? Like, if you had described to me where Adam lives and what Adam does, and me as a relatively senior and sophisticated business person asked me to guess Adam's salary, I probably would have been like within 10 or 20% maximum off. And so now that I know the exact figure, what does it change? Well, not much. Like nothing's actually like super, super shocking about this. And so I feel I kind of know this. I kind of know that it would actually work. And yet it's very culturally uncomfortable for me. Right? Like I feel kind of like when my mother joined Facebook, how she felt, and she joined, and I think never posted anything. I think she's just there to like stalk me or something. But the reality is like she's gotten herself mentally there that she should join. She joined many years ago. And she sees the things that like we and others post, but she does not mentally have it in her to be like, oh, here's a picture of me having a shish kebab, right? Like, I don't think she'll ever get there. Whereas I am of the age and grew up, and they're like, oh, okay, no, not only I'll be on Facebook, yeah. Once in a while, I'll post a picture of, here's Antonis eating some tasty food. Like that doesn't cause any anxiety for me. I think the idea of posting would cause anxiety for my mother. And I kind of feel with Buffer that I'm in her role. Like I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, wow, that's really weird. And I'm comfortable looking at, I can kind of get my head around that you're doing it, but can I do it? I don't know, right? And so, but it's interesting because if this is a trend, if transparency becomes more of a trend for private companies as well, then you might see it in private companies too. And if it's a trend where Buffer is on the bleeding edge. I mean, I have never seen anything else like this, and they've been doing it for a while. They were very early to it. So even, I want to summarize how I feel about this topic. I believe for governments and for not-for-profits, so charitable organizations, foundations, it is an extremely logical approach for them to be very transparent about these topics because they are effectively organizations of the public trust, and therefore there is an expectation that they should be disclosing what they're doing with money that they're using on behalf of, the whole community. For private companies, where at the end of the day they still have some arbitrary number of shareholders, there's a spectrum today. And the spectrum is if you're completely private, you don't have to publish anything. And if you're a publicly listed company, you have to publish some level of detail, but nothing like this basically transaction level. Like Buffer is not a transaction level, but it's close. Right? If you can see that a person canceled their small business version 2 subscription 7 minutes ago, and someone else paid them $10 also 7 minutes ago, that's pretty close to transaction level transparency. And it's interesting, right? Because we take this other super cliche, but also true. The future's here. The future's already here, but just unevenly distributed. I wonder if Buffer or firms like Buffer might be a very tiny little indication of where the future might be for more organizations, that it's okay to be more transparent, and there's actually benefits to being more transparent. And if you read the Buffer's philosophy on why they're transparent, it's super interesting. And again, I'm not quite sure I believe that it's a net benefit. I don't believe it, but I am intrigued. I am intrigued by the approach because it has a sense, it gives me a sense of there'll be more of this in the future, not less of it. It's not just one quirky company and it just happened once and it'll never happen again. It does give me the feeling that it's the beginning of a trend. And if you look at anything over the last 10, 20, 30 years, I think you're seeing more transparency, not less. It's a bumpy road, but I think more, not less. And in a world of more transparency, blockchains are super interesting. I mean, they're a great way to give transparency and give transparency in a manner that is credible and believable and unalterable, and say, yeah, not only I'm trying to be transparent, I can guarantee you I'm being transparent because these are the types of security guarantees that a blockchain can give you. So I've ran a little bit over. I hope this was interesting. As with everything else, there's no right answer. You cannot predict necessarily the future, but you can use these frameworks to try and think through things. So thank you very much, everybody. We were super excited and honored that you joined us for MOOC 10. We hope we will see some of you in the MSc program. Good luck on the exam, and have a great weekend, everyone.